This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening, welcome to Teachers Talk Radio and tonight's Late Late Show, which will be hosted by me, Emily Edwards. This week we'll be looking at the idea of game time. Is it real? And if you do have it, how do you make the most of it?
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio, and as I said, my name is Emily Edwards. For any recurring listeners, welcome back. It's good to chat to you again. And if this is your first time with me, here's a bit about my background in education. I'm currently teaching secondary history as a full-time classroom teacher. I started my NQT year back when it was called an NQT in 2017, and I have an NPQML as well as experience in middle leadership, both in temporary positions as a pastoral deputy head of sixth form and curriculum lead for history, though thankfully not at the same time. I also have experience in teaching Key Stage 3 to Key Stage 5 for history and Key Stage 5 or A-level politics. So tonight we're going to be looking at the ever-elusive idea of game time and how to make the most of it before we're back to business in September. For those new to teaching or those unfamiliar with the term, game time refers to the lesson time that becomes extra free time for staff after their Year 11 and or Year 13 classes have started study leave. So is this period of time actually real? Or is it more so of a myth? And if we do have it in our timetables this year, how do we make sure that we make the most of it ready for September?
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the three-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC reports on proposed changes to sex and relationship education guidance for schools in England. According to the report on the news website, government sources have told the BBC about the plans, which include banning sex education for under 9s, as well as additional guidance for teaching about gender identity. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said the new guidance would ensure children were not exposed to disturbing content. Teachers have responded with concerns that some of the guidance appears contradictory and say there is no evidence of a widespread problem with current guidance. The new plans say secondary school pupils will learn about protected characteristics such as sexual orientation and gender reassignment, but makes it clear that schools should not teach about the concept of gender identity. It said it was right to take a cautious approach. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan, speaking on BBC Breakfast, said biological sex is the basis of relationship, sex and health education, not these contested views. ASCL's General Secretary said that it was important that banning the teaching of gender identity did not shut down discussion, and that young people must be able to discuss this without their teachers feeling in peril of saying something wrong. The new guidance also strengthens rules to make it easier for parents to access teaching materials to see what their children are learning, although many point out that this guidance is currently in place. Lucy Emerson of the Sex Education Forum said, "If topics were to be restricted, it will leave children even more dependent on getting answers from online sources." The draft guidance is now open to a 9-week consultation, but once finalised will be statutory. An outline of the proposed new age restrictions can be found on the BBC News website and the consultation on the Department for Education website. In the United States, pro-Palestinian protests at colleges and universities have made the news again, as some graduates from Duke University in North Carolina staged a walkout. The protest came just prior to a speech by veteran comedian Jerry Seinfeld, who was due to receive an honorary degree. Mr. Seinfeld has been a vocal supporter of Israel since the 7th of October attacks by Hamas. Some students stayed to hear the speech, but videos posted on social media also showed some booing and chanting slogans in support of Palestine. Whilst the ceremony at Duke went ahead, plans at other universities, including Columbia and the University of Southern California, have cancelled or restructured their main graduation ceremonies to avoid further complications. The Daily Mirror features comments from Strictly Judge Shirley Ballas about free school meals. She focuses on her own experiences of being raised by a single mother and says she understands what increasing numbers of British children living in poverty are going through. She recalls looking forward to her free school meal, referring to it as a nice lunch every day. At 63, Ms. Ballas is hoping to use her experiences to highlight the issue of poverty by being part of an ITV documentary called Kids in Poverty. According to the Mirror, 4.3 million children in Britain get their only meal a day at school. 30% of UK children are living below the poverty line, with 1 million classed as being in extreme poverty. Figures from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation say that the share of children living in absolute poverty has increased by 148% since 2017. And is at its highest level for 30 years. The documentary can be seen on demand, and full details of the article from the Mirror are on its website. Finally, students at Lancaster University have voted for all food served on campus to be plant-based, according to BBC Radio Lancashire. The Students' Union is supporting the gradual transition to 100% vegan menus, with a target of 50% by 2025 and 100% by 2027. A campaigner told the BBC that Lancaster University has a goal of net zero by 2035 and that implementing a plant-based catering system aligns with this goal. The Countryside Alliance said too few students had been involved in the decision, with 18 of the 19 delegates on the Students' Union Council, who do represent 13,000 students, voting to support the motion. But the Countryside Alliance called it an attack on freedom of choice and said the decision should have been put to a wider student vote. Universities including Stirling, Warwick and Newcastle have also voted to go plant-based, although Edinburgh rejected the plan. The votes have been organised following Animal Rising's Plant-Based Universities campaign. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
So, why gain time tonight? It's one of those topics that I feel isn't always the most well discussed amongst the teaching profession. I know not everybody does get gain time, especially obviously looking at secondary. If you don't have any year 11 or year 13 classes, this topic may seem a bit out of the blue. So, what was my inspiration? Well, my inspiration for tonight's show is very much a personal one, as I've been lucky enough to have 2 year 11 groups and a year 13 group this year. And with my year 13 class having finished their time in school last Friday, and my year 11s formally going off next Friday, I think this Friday, literally coming up, I'm at a point in my year where I've got a bit more gain time than I think I've ever had before. And it's always a topic that has weighed on me year on year as to how I use it, how do I make sure I don't waste a minute of it, and always kicking myself in September based on how I did wind up using it that year. So, in order to hold myself accountable and get lots of jobs off the half term 6 to do list done, that's going to be especially difficult with having 2 periods of gain time last thing on a Friday in particular. I thought I'd talk about what we should do to keep ourselves in check, what we need to keep in mind when planning, and how to make the most of that gain time. So hopefully this year I can be a little bit more successful. So, as always, if you have any ideas to share, please feel free to add them into the chat. I find it really great to get inspiration from different people as they are responding back. And obviously, I will post links to the show on Twitter or X. So, feel free, obviously, to feedback via the Twitter X polls or via the Teacher Talk Radio hashtag. So, with that being said, I will talk about the poll I did run leading up to this show near the end of today's session. So do listen in and keep an eye out for that. And we'll talk about what teachers have already said leading up to it. But if you've got any more ideas, please feel free to add them into the chat. So before I jump into tonight, I do think it's important to note that I know gain time isn't a guarantee, as most schools have gotten into bad habits of using teachers for cover or simply keeping year 11s and 13s on site in lessons for as long as possible. And my personal thoughts on this are, unsurprisingly, in favour of classroom teachers. I think it's difficult enough to motivate exam students these days leading into the May half term, let alone amongst the chaos that is the exam timetable, causing disruption to lesson time, as well as siphoning student attention towards whatever exam comes first in the calendar. So, with that in mind, I wanted to share some of the guidance regarding cover so that teachers who are listening and at home can feel a bit more empowered when talking about obviously protecting their time and making sure that if schools are getting into those bad habits, those can be addressed without obviously burdening individual teachers who have that extra gain time. So, the guidance states for schools trying to use staff for cover in their gain time as part of the school teachers' paying conditions document. It states that teachers should be required to provide cover only rarely and only in circumstances that are not foreseeable. They do emphasise this does not apply to teachers who are employed wholly or mainly for the purpose of providing cover. And the NEU builds on this by saying that teachers may be directed to use gain time to cover for a colleague, but this should only happen rarely, which means in exceptional circumstances only, such as emergency situations. Cover by teachers should only occur in exceptional cases in which all other options have been exhausted. Financial difficulties are not included in such exceptional cases. This is also mimicked by the NASUWT. Always get struggled with that acronym. If you are part of that union like myself, so the advice really stays the same. So whilst I understand I'm talking about best case scenarios with the show tonight and focusing on what we can do with the time that we do have, please do speak to your union or in-person school rep if you believe that your school's policy cover is in breach of those rules and you are being taken advantage of. I know gain time is something that can be a really useful tool for us going into September. So obviously make sure that you have that support and you know that you've got that support should you need it. So, with that caveat addressed, what is the best way to use gain time in the last half term before the summer holidays when it's essential to make the most of that time to ensure a really smooth end to the academic year and to set the groundwork for the next one? So, here are some suggestions for the best use of a teacher's gain time during this period, as well as some of my own thoughts and views on these topics. So, firstly, teachers should use gain time as a way to clear the workload from the current academic year. This idea is something that I think reflects the workload and the current pressures that all teachers are under during our day to day, as we have to try and keep on top of work and we are in this constant battle to avoid taking this work home with us. For me, I always see gain time as a bit like payday in the sense that I try and pay myself first. So the idea usually is you put money into your savings and your bills before using any money for the fun stuff. And I use this as well when it comes to my gain time planning. So my port of call is to use the time to make sure that my lessons for this academic year are fully planned, fully resourced, and everything is as it should be in essence for the rest of this year, so that I haven't left kind of the bulk of my work until after the May half term, when understandably it might get a bit busier with marking or last minute jobs or work experience weeks and things like that. So I do want to make sure that my marking is often prioritized as well during this time. So I use the gain time specifically to try and get through as much marking as physically possible in school, whilst I have that motivation, whilst I have the fewest distractions around me. I can close the door, um, get myself into the zone, and just work my way through, say, a bunch of year 12 mocks or a bunch of year 8 assessments, whatever it is. And that way, then I don't have to take that work home with me on the evening. I definitely won't have to take it home over the weekend. And especially when the weather is so lovely, it is imperative for me, I think, to try and get that work done in lessons. So that way I'm not obviously adding to my workload at home. And I think in terms of other little jobs you can do and you can sort out whilst you're using your gain time effectively, those small emails or admin jobs do get sorted much quicker when you're in school rather than having to log in, get the connection, obviously, to work from home or to try and log in using two-factor authentication. And ultimately, I think by getting those jobs done whilst you're in the mindset at school, it eases the mental load and ensures that all those urgent jobs are taken care of. I don't need to worry about prepping for September if there are jobs for July that need to get done now. Another way to use your gain time really effectively, and I think it's mostly once I've addressed the issues on the near horizon, is that I use gain time to reflect and review this year. So, what worked well, what didn't work, what ideas or strategies do I want to carry forward with me, and what mistakes can I learn from? All these questions are vital for us as teachers to avoid getting into bad habits. And for example, I try and repeat what has worked. So, if I've seen a particular behavior strategy that's been really effective for me, I make sure to make a note of that, incorporate it into my practice going forward. And if there's, for example, a lesson that just hasn't quite worked and I've tried it in different ways and it's just still not succeeded, then obviously using the time I have before the summer to make those tweaks whilst it's fresh in my mind, what hasn't worked. And using that reflection to make sure that I don't then repeat those same mistakes going forward. A really good example of this, actually, in my own practice, is that I found a really good method of assessment prep and the assessments themselves, structuring them in a way that makes it more accessible for students, especially the revision, rather than having kind of tasks that students complete independently. Working my way through a practice paper has been really effective in showing students exactly what to expect, as well as creating an opportunity to address any misconceptions rather than students asking those in the exam itself, which can be quite distracting for themselves and for others in the moment. So, taking that approach and being more reflective with that, I've started to incorporate those structured revision lessons into my future practice. And I've made a note that whenever we come across revision lessons going forward, that is the method that has worked best, and so is the method that I think would be a great idea to carry on with. So ultimately, I think giving ourselves as teachers time to identify those areas for improvement and celebrating our successes, not just looking for ways to nitpick our own practice, means that we can really enable ourselves to refine our strategies and plan really effectively. For the future. So rather than just using it as an opportunity to fight fires now, we can use that time to really improve ourselves going forward. So, in theory, fewer fires going into the future. So, for a slightly less educational use of gain time, I do think it's important for us to organise our classrooms for the upcoming year. And this might sound a bit odd and a bit of a waste of time, but I think for me especially, I find having a really cluttered classroom, uh, kind of outdated displays or damaged displays, or just generally things looking a bit untidy and a mess, can be quite stressful coming back in September. I always tell myself there's plenty of time. We've got the TED days. There'll be a couple of meetings, but I'll have plenty of time to sort out the classroom. And for the past couple of years, that has been proven wrong time and time and again. So, taking the opportunity to declutter and organize our classroom materials, sorting out what resources we need, asking the finance team to fund any bits and pieces we may need to prevent coming up short in September, can really give us a breath of fresh air when we get to September and give us that time to focus on arguably far more important matters, such as sorting out seating plans or going over exam support and any SEN accommodations that we might need to put in place for our students. So for me, sorting out papers, going through books, sorting out which supplies I might need, and getting rid of old resources that I don't need can be quite a difficult job. I'm a magpie teacher, I say that quite proudly. Um, so, this idea of hoarding all these resources and never letting them go is something that I've had to untrain myself to do, in essence. But it does give me more space for those new folders, those books that I actually use in the classroom. Especially as we started in my school generally to move towards textbooks again rather than creating everything from scratch. Having those resources that served its purpose but ultimately aren't the best going forward now that we have textbooks and more structured resourcing that way. It's great for me to be able to just clear it out and get only what I need back in rather than having folders and folders and folders of resources that are nice but ultimately aren't serving their purpose anymore. And my mantra at the moment is kind of a messy desk is a messy mind. And for someone with OCD, taking the time to organize my whole classroom and properly organizing um, resources, books, equipment into places that make better sense. So having equipment, for example, near my desk. So whenever a student asks, Miss, I don't have my pen, could I borrow a pen? No problem. Swap me your phone. Here's a pen. It's a nice, smooth process rather than rummaging through a desk trying to find, a biro that I can lend out. So it takes a lot of my mind again, and I think it gives me such a boost when I go into the summer holidays, knowing that my classroom is really organized, is really clean, my displays are up and running, and I'm really proud of them. And it means then when I come back in September, I don't think that there is a laundry list of jobs that I need to jump into, more so kind of the admin side of, sorting out my classroom, sorting out displays. Um, I can then just jump into the core things I need to focus on. I don't have to sit in meetings blanking a little bit, focused internally on, okay, I need to print out this for the display, or I need to sort out these pens. How many pens do we have? Do I have enough exercise books? I can just focus and be more present in those September sessions. And my future self will always appreciate my past self for making it a little bit easier to start fresh in the next school year. And let's be frank, TED Days at the start of September are always taken up with meetings and talks rather than actual practical time for teachers to prepare. So, doing the legwork now to sort out those displays, to clear out books, and to give the classroom generally a good tidying will always pay off. It's also a nice way, I think, to just wrap up the year. It feels quite cathartic to just dump a bunch of resources from the year into the recycling and walk away without having to worry about leaving a mountain of jobs for me to sort out in September. This can help obviously teachers generally kind of reduce stress, save time in September, and means that we don't have to keep popping back in the summer to sort out bits and pieces that we know we won't have time for in September. So before I jump into a few other points, we do have a couple of messages to share. So I'll be back in 5 minutes.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the 3-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
So, speaking of the future, I think it almost goes without saying that teachers need to use the game time to prepare for September. So, having a couple to a few extra hours to prep a fortnight can really make a huge difference, especially when that time is filled up with teaching when we come back in September. So, usually by this point in the year, timetables start appearing. I know mine is going to be hopefully coming out just after the May half term. So from that point on, I'll know what lessons I'm teaching, what I'll need to prep. I can start looking at the system to see what we already have in place. And that will be so helpful for me to then start figuring out what I need to prioritize and actually spend my time on in game time rather than creating this laundry list of tasks that I should or could complete and winding up not actually needing them come September. So I do suggest as well trying to gain access to the calendar for next academic year, just to know what your pinch points might be. So, for example, I know last year I had my timetable and I saw that I had 4 Year 9 groups, which is terrifying on first glance. And I do appreciate any and all sympathy that'll come my way with that. But overall, whilst the classes have been absolutely brilliant this year, I knew that when the calendar came out, I would have to look out for events, especially regarding Year 9, that would be pinch points. So, looking at parents' evenings, assessment points, data drops, knowing when I'm going to be busy and when I can potentially claw some time back. Means that I can be better prepared for when I need to prioritize other work or when I can give myself a quieter work week as a bit of a reward for marking 4 sets of Year 9 assessments in 2 weeks. I know this year I've given myself no work weekends after each time I finished a round of formal Year 9 marking, knowing I'd need the breather. And it has been one of my far more sensible ideas. And I would highly recommend trying to carve out that time where possible, where if you have a busy pinch point, using your gain time to either prep in advance for it. So I know I made a stack ton of Year 9 lessons that I knew were adapted as I was familiar with some of the students, but also as well knowing that if I had everything in place, then when it came round to those pinch points, I could prioritize that work. I wasn't trying to also then plan my Year 12 lessons or sort out my Year 7 assessments because that had already been addressed in the previous year with my gain time then. So it also helped knowing that this year I didn't have a Year 10 class. So I didn't actually have to spend any of my gain time from last year on tweaking or updating my Year 10 lessons. Sorry. So actually, that was something that took a lot off my plate, and it meant that other members of staff who did have Year 10 could prioritize that, and I could delegate that work out to them. And obviously, seeing this year that Year 10 is most likely back on my timetable, based on my curriculum lead's discussions with me, that means that focusing on Year 10, I can now look at those lessons that my colleague has made and use that as my starting point rather than having to go back to the drawing board and start everything from scratch. So, whilst the tasks may differ, obviously depending on the year, depending on what your timetable might look like, using gain time efficiently and effectively to prepare for September is a really key tool and is a wonderful way to have a more restful summer and definitely a more confident start to the next academic year. So, a little bit of a more unusual use for gain time can be to prioritize yourself and your professional development. So, I know in teaching we often put ourselves last when it comes to prioritizing support. And I think that the extra time that we do get from gain time is a great opportunity to justify focusing on our professional development and giving our classroom practice a bit of a boost or giving ourselves more opportunities going forward. So, not just looking at those clear kind of progression opportunities, so taking on certain extra tasks or taking on a TLR, but using gain time for general professional development activities that enhances our teaching skills or knowledge in a particular area can be done in a variety of different ways. So, for example, you could attend workshops, you could read educational articles and include those ideas in your lessons. You could participate in online courses, whatever that looks like. We all know that our developments as teachers are so important, and that having that continuous development is essential for us to stay updated on the latest research, the latest trends, and seeing what actually is the best practice so far in education. And investing that time enhances our effectiveness as teachers and, in essence, fosters the focus on our personal professional growth. We always put students first. It's important for us to also place our own practice and our own skills as well at the forefront of our focus. So, for example, I'm using some of my gain time this year in June to focus on finishing my project for my school's internal CPD kind of middle leadership program. And even though it's a temporary kind of step back for me this year from leadership to focus on getting this really good work life balance, I found that using those few hours of my gain time, my planned use of that gain time, to focus on that project and build on what I've already started to use some of the time that my year 11s have been in exams for this week to prep that plan, to prep that PowerPoint and that script, means that I'll be able to deliver this presentation to SLT about the journey that I've been on. And I think taking that time to make sure this is done to the standard that I'd be really happy with um, would be great in terms of appreciating my existing leadership skills and understanding what I can improve on going forward if and when I decide to return to leadership. So, without obviously having the time to explicitly address this and have this as part of my gain time jobs, I do kind of run the risk of ignoring these professional development opportunities because I just wouldn't prioritize them. I'd leave them as an opportunity maybe for September, or I'd go, well, maybe I'll just quickly do something at home rather than taking this kind of sectioned off time to really make sure that this is done to the standard that I'm happy with. And that can be, again, for any professional development opportunity. If you're doing an online course, taking obviously time out of the day rather than having to do that at home where you may have obviously lots of distractions. If you have families, for example, obviously that's quite hard to juggle and to manage whilst also doing CPD. So using the time in school as kind of like an extra lesson for ourselves can be a great personal investment, a professional investment for ourselves. So, another idea for gain time is that if there are others in your department who also have some gain time, getting together to collaborate could be a great use of this time. So, I know one of my colleagues teaches year 11 at the same time as I do. And so, obviously, now that we'll both have gain time at the same point in the day, it gives us this great opportunity to discuss how we found teaching our new exam board for the first time. This is our first kind of full run through with OCR. So, it's been a bit of a kind of hoping for the best a little bit in some cases as we've taken everything we can. And obviously, the best way to know how best to deal with an exam board is usually through practice. So the fact that we have kind of leaned on each other a bit to try and boost ourselves up and navigate this new exam board to the best of our skills, I think it'd be great to come back now after we've finished and after we feel really proud of what we've done for our young people. Um, it can be, and I'm hoping it will be, a great way to help build on those successes, to reflect on things that we found difficult. So I know we found timings very difficult, and trying to figure out the best way to incorporate assessment without overwhelming our students, and obviously getting our heads around the mark scheme. Now taking that time to collaborate really helps us with those resources and building on that success going forward. So, generally, I know collaboration among teachers can also really foster a sense of community and provide that opportunity to share expertise and share resources. And having those different perspectives helps to boost up the level of innovation that we can cultivate in our departments. And in essence, we can collectively deal with problems together. So rather than trying to individually, bash your heads against a brick wall, trying to get past a problem, Sometimes sharing that with another member of staff and discussing what their perspective is can be really useful in finding a solution that we may never have thought of if we hadn't had that collaborative time. It's also great to set goals for the next academic year if you're a head of department or a curriculum lead, or you're working with other teachers, say on like a split timetable. Then it's great to either get the department together or get all the class teachers together without having to use time at the end of the day. And that can really improve the department's efficiency because obviously it's the best use of everybody's time at that moment. And it improves morale. You're not dragging department meetings out significantly longer than they should or having to schedule in extra meetings near the end of the year when, let's be frank, we're getting very tired. We're looking forward to the 6 weeks. And I think that's also a great way to engage with staff whilst their minds are still focused, obviously, in the classroom work. They're not kind of switching off and getting ready to go home. They're still fresh and they're able to share those ideas and get some really good ideas ready for September. Um, it also provides an opportunity to create kind of roadmaps for professional growth. So, for example, if middle leaders or senior leaders are talking to staff about appraisals or talking about opportunities for next year or the following few years, having that time within school can be great in terms of that they're going to be there, that it's easy to book, and that we can have that discussion through that leadership perspective of how best to support that member of staff in their professional journey going forward through either broader objectives or really kind of specific next steps. So, in terms of that collaborative aspect, taking the time to reflect, taking the time to gain other perspectives and ideas. I know I've been speaking to my colleague today actually about where we want to take year 9 lessons and the year 9 curriculum going forward to try and boost our GCSE numbers even more. We've had great success this year after a rocky year a couple of years ago in boosting those numbers again. So obviously having that time to discuss in our shared gain time helped us to put some ideas onto paper as to what we'd like to do going forward that we can then bring to wider department meetings in and out of school. So overall collaboration with other teachers or staff members to share ideas, resources and strategies can be a great use of gain time as it helps generate these fresh perspectives and sometimes new approaches to our current teaching and learning. So, finally, how can we use gain time? Well, we can use it a little selfishly. We can use it for a bit of self care. Now, before we get carried away with this, I do not mean start setting up a few candles and pouring yourself a glass of wine and settling in with a good book for an hour, as I'm well aware that would lead to many, many problems. But using the time more purposefully can really help with feelings of burnout and can be a great way to maintain our overall well being. So, we know how demanding teaching is. We know that it is both physical and mental in terms of the strain. And so, taking the time to address those difficult problems as to what is draining our time and how we can address that can allow us to return our classrooms next lesson or to the next day feeling much more refreshed and energized. So, I know this year I will be making some phone calls home, obviously some positive, which would be great as kind of a mood booster throughout the day. But also, there are a couple of students who are starting to go a little bit off the rails near the end of the year that obviously I want to make sure we get solved before obviously the end of this year. And if I teach them again next year, making sure that's nipped in the bud. And I know that if I waited till the end of the day or the end of the week, I'm going to be absolutely knackered. So taking some of my gain time to do that helps to take that off my mental plate and give me that sense of a job completed before leaving for the end of the day, knowing that I'm not having to add things to my to-do list for the next day or having to have this weigh on my mind as I'm trying to teach or deal with other issues or general jobs throughout the rest of the day. It could also be something that you use to focus on a task that brings you some joy or satisfaction. I know I love lesson planning like no other. So if you are like me and you enjoy putting together lessons and doing the research and creating different ways for students to learn, obviously the different topics, then that can actually be a great self care use of your gain time while still feeling productive. It doesn't mean obviously ignoring 7 urgent emails that you have to address that day. But it does mean that if you have a list of jobs that you need to get done and you're feeling a bit drained, sometimes picking the one that brings you a bit of joy can be a great way for you to feel a bit more energized and feel a bit more productive without burnt out. So ultimately, it's whatever works best for you. As to what is going to be a great use of your gain time, even if it doesn't necessarily fit into what you might view as a productive use of your time, it can still be great self care, because self care isn't just about indulgence, it is also about doing what is best for you and your mental health. So, if it is getting a really important job off the list, that can be a really good example of gain time used for self care. If it's taking a bit more of a laid back lunch, and so not working through your lunch and taking the time um, to, say, for example, have like a bathroom break that you're not constantly watching the clock for, or having a few extra minutes in after lunch, obviously if that goes into your gain time, to make sure that you've really enjoyed that, you're not rushing and throwing jaffa cakes down your throat before year 9 rocks up. um, Anything that helps to boost you just before the summer can be a great way to start winding down and not eat then into your summer holidays with this feeling of burnout and overcoming that. So, those are my top tips for how to use game time and try to make it as varied as possible. So, not just the generic prep for September and get everything else done on the yearly to do list. But I know that every year we have very lofty ambitions for what we think we can manage to fit into our time, only to be left really stressed and rushed by the final bell in July. So, if you are in that situation, what can we do to avoid game time feeling wasted? And how I'm going to structure this section out for us is that I'm going to go through some of the generic problems that can come up with gain time, as well as some of my attempted solutions to see how we can mitigate each one as much as possible. And I will say most of this is based on personal experience and anecdotal advice and evidence from my colleagues. So if you do have any other tips or tricks to help improve um, the use of gain time, please feel free to add them into the chat. Would love to hear some other ideas as well. So, first issue, and it's probably the most obvious one, is that we will overwhelm ourselves and burn out before the summer. Planning too much obviously can lead to that burnout, as we will feel that pressure to constantly preparing for lessons, getting ready for assessments, sorting out new activities. And that can result in increased stress levels and decreased job satisfaction. So, what's my solution? First things first, acceptance is the key. We've got to be prepared that the time won't always be free time and anticipate getting way less work done than we would like. So it might be a great way to create a master list and then sorting that out into what you need to do before the summer holidays, what I'd like to do before September, and what can be left until September, so that you can start to prioritize and focus on what matters to you and your classroom practice. You might actually be surprised at the amount of jobs that you'd like to do, but they don't actually have much of an impact, that you can just then wind up scrapping them from the list altogether and reducing that overall master list significantly. I've found that having this prioritized approach to jobs and accepting that, yes, I'd love to be able to plan and resource a full scheme of work in 48 hours with a couple of hours of gain time here and there, but that's just not possible. So I have to be more realistic. If I say, look, it'll take me an hour to create a lesson, prep all the resources, go over it with a fine tooth comb and be happy with it, then if I get it done quicker than that, it feels like a success. And if it takes me that full hour, then I don't feel as if I'm running behind or I need to take on more work to try and catch up. It makes things a lot more manageable, and overall gives me that satisfaction of achieving my goals and avoiding that sense of burnout. We can also try and set some more realistic expectations by saying no to non essential commitments, seeking support from colleagues or mentors as well to alleviate some of that stress. And in terms of saying no, I find that really difficult. And maybe this will be a whole nother show of how to say no to line managers. But once I get that done to a fine art, I'll happily write a book, I think, instead of just a 1 hour show, because lots of things to discuss there. But ultimately, if you do struggle like I do with saying no, a great way to accept this is say, I would like to, but right now I have XYZ commitments. What would you like me to deprioritize so I could focus on that? Or sometimes I know a colleague has somewhat used me as a bit of as a PA of, oh, could you check this? Could you sort that? Would you mind finding this out for me? And sometimes just being blunt of like, I'm really sorry, I don't have the time to do that. If you need help finding the calendar, this is how you find it, but ultimately I don't have the time to do those jobs for you. And creating that protection for ourselves, even if they are very well-meaning requests, can be a great way to avoid that burnout and to keep that to-do list much shorter if it's just the task that you need to do and that you want to prioritize doing before September. So, second big issue is obviously time constraints as we focus too much on a task we enjoy rather than the necessary jobs. So, this feeds in a little bit with procrastination. And I think ultimately making sure that we are prioritizing those jobs. It can obviously be a problem if we don't when we arrive in September and we see that plans have radically changed and the thing that we focus so much of our time on actually doesn't really matter anymore. It makes our hard work obviously feel thoroughly wasted. So, what's the solution? Well, I think keeping planning realistic and keeping it to the first half term is a great way to free up time in September. So you're not coming back into school, you're not rushing to get lessons prepped and ready for the next week. But it does give you that time to adapt plans and still stay ahead of the game. So I say that as as much as you can do in teaching. But if plans do change and you've only planned the first half term, say they change halfway through, okay, we're going to tweak this unit 3 in the curriculum, that'll be January half term, we just want to change the inquiry question to this, so we'll need a few lessons tweaked and adapted. Not obviously planning the whole year in advance or trying to plan the whole year in advance means then that you can still adapt. You can then make those tweaks without feeling as if all the hard work that you put in June and July has been completely wasted because you now have to plan from scratch. It avoids that level of resentment, and it means then we're not overwhelming our to-do list with 101 jobs that we'd like to do. It'd be lovely to walk in September knowing the full year is planned, resourced, and ready to go. Um, but obviously keeping in mind that things do change. If we are keeping our planning realistic and limited to that first half term, we still get to stay half term ahead of the game without obviously overwhelming ourselves to that extent. So, third big issue, obviously, with gain time is the increased stress levels of trying to accomplish too much and obviously then dealing with that stress and carrying it over into the summer holidays. I think this overemphasis on completing a really ambitious to-do list doesn't really give us this time for reflection and doesn't give us this time to review our teaching practice. And that reflection is absolutely essential to our growth as professionals. So, what is my solution here? I think striking a balance between planning and other essential tasks. So, it may be providing non lesson related goals or non um, generic workload related goals, but focusing more on topics that we'd want to improve with our professional development. It might be looking at other opportunities or taking the time to take that course or that online webinar to make sure that we are seeking support from our colleagues, our administrators, or other support staff to help alleviate some of the pressures associated with planning or with other areas of our jobs. To make sure then that we're not trying to overextend ourselves and add that stress onto ourselves when reality, a problem shared is a problem halved. So, taking that time to reduce your stress levels through planning and getting that support can be absolutely essential in ensuring that we're not wasting our gain time by just adding a lot of stress into the picture. So, with my thoughts all out there for discussion, it is time to see what the Teachers Talk Radio community has said about gain time and hopefully share a bit of good practice. So, as always, obviously, I want to thank everybody who participated in the Twitter or X poll. That's fantastic. Please do obviously keep participating. It's great to hear your voices. And as you know, I do like sharing them as part of my shows. So, without further ado, having a look at the poll I put up last week with the question, what do you spend most of the extra time doing in gain time? The majority of participants, so over 100 votes, about 66% of them said that they focused on prepping for September. And I think obviously that makes complete sense when considering how chaotic the start of the year is and how many plates we have to keep spinning when we return in September after having the summer off to decompress and for a lot of us take our brains out of teaching for a little bit. And looking at the comments, when people were talking about that prep for September, responses including things like creating worksheets, creating lesson materials, providing extra resources for the next year, or sorting out small projects for that extracurricular clubs and things like that. All of those are really good points to make. And seeing people obviously talk about different events they need to prep for in September, assemblies in particular for me come to mind. That's a really great, obviously, use of the time that you have in July to mean that you have everything ready for you in September. But interestingly, though, which something that surprised me was that the biggest amount of votes that came next were for the other category, and that's usually not something that happens. Normally, people like interacting with the options that I give, and so the fact that the other seems to have drawn a lot of interest does tell me that people using gain time at the moment isn't for some of the reasons I've listed here, but actually it's being taken up with other responsibilities. So, most responses there discuss how they weren't able to take advantage of gain time due to being placed on cover or having to keep students in after May. And I think that's absolutely wild. I think somebody said that they're still in school until early June, which blew my mind because I'm not sure what good that does staff or young people at this point to kind of keep them in and try and maintain normal lessons, especially revision lessons, this close to the actual exam itself, or even after the exam has passed, trying to manage obviously for other subjects. As well as people talking about catching up with jobs on their to do list that they haven't yet got round to. So, that's completely understandable. And I think it is important, especially with talk about cover. I know I've already mentioned it at the start of the show, but if you have just joined in, um, do make sure obviously you check your school's cover policy and that you're not being taken advantage of. Obviously, rarely cover is the go to union stance. So if your school is asking you to spend, every Friday where you have a gains time free to be used for cover, then absolutely have a word with your in school rep or speak to your union, because obviously it shouldn't be that regular and it should only be a last ditch resort rather than kind of the go to of they have an hour free, they can do some free cover for us. Um, Now, kind of building back into the poll itself, though, not many votes were for engaging with CPD or for reflection. I think overall it was about 11% combined, and about 7% for engaging with CPD, and about 4% saying they were reviewing the year so far. So I think that's quite interesting that not many teachers either have the time or have kind of thought about using gain time in this way. And I think that could be a really great opportunity for a lot of staff to take advantage of. And I think it's no shock that obviously we're incredibly overworked and that considering obviously the time and pay compensation we currently get as a profession, we don't really have a lot of time to just stop and breathe and look at what we've done to this point. But I think it can be a great way for us to not only talk about what we need to improve and be on that cycle of self improvement, but also as well to celebrate our successes. It's not very often that we get the time to stop and go, what has really worked? What am I really proud of? And something that I noticed within this profession is that if you don't find those successes, if you don't look for the times where things have gone well, it can feel incredibly draining that we keep giving and giving and giving and seemingly getting nothing back. But taking a look back at the emails, maybe you've had a really lovely one from your line manager or from a student or from a parent, can be a great way to kind of boost yourself up before the summer, or by reflecting on what units have worked really well. So students may have been really engaged with a particular topic. That's obviously something for you to feel really proud of, that you've had that ability to engage these students with a topic that hopefully obviously is also close to you and your subject. Um, and I think that can be something that can be a really positive way to use gain time, whilst not being obviously the most traditional use of the time. So I think ultimately, in summary, gain time is a really crucial period for us as teachers, to give us that time for those essential tasks, as well as managing our opportunities going forward, both in September and even longer term. And in terms of avoiding some of the bad habits, like covering classes or doing tasks that don't really contribute to our professional growth, it is obviously really important for us to try and make the most of whatever extra time that we do get. And we should do that by setting realistic goals, prioritizing tasks, ensuring we've got this balance between our work and our well-being, not just using it as an opportunity to run ourselves into the ground and hoping that summer rejuvenates us, but using it as a great way to focus on the immediate, medium, and long term, as a great effective strategy to benefit us long term. So overall, addressing obviously the use of gain time, hopefully this has been really helpful for you tonight, and fingers crossed we can make gain time this year serve its intended purpose and enhance the quality of education that we're able to provide to our students, whilst also keeping our professional selves rejuvenated and at least energized to get us into the September start. And as always, thank you so much to our listeners again for tuning in. I really appreciate all the support every fortnight, and with the discussions both on the Twitter or X poll, as well as the feedback getting as well from the Teachers Talk Radio website. So feel free obviously to catch up on the Teachers Talk Radio website if you haven't been able to listen to the show, or via Podbean. And as always, do keep an eye out on my socials to keep an eye out for the next show, the next topic, and as well so you can then get involved. As always, take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time for the next show. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.